Hey guys, what's up? It's your boy Shanus, and as you can see, we have a change of scenery from the last video. What up guys, it's your boy Shanus, and real quick disclaimer on this video. Unfortunately, I lost a few, well, I didn't lose the files per se, but some of the original recording files of this install were corrupted. So there's a little added footage that I did, of course, to try to best explain the process. I do apologize. I will make sure to make a follow-up video of the install process once again in the near future. But for now, this is going to be as best of a job as I can. I'll include, of course, any of the salvage footage. It should make sense after reviewing the footage. It's definitely understandable. But of course, if you have any questions of the process, please feel free to comment down below. I'd be more than glad to get back to you guys. But let's jump straight into it. Today, I'm actually going to show you the blow-off valve that's going to be installed, and it's from the good folks over at ADDW1. And let me show you this thing, because this thing's actually quite beautiful. I know I don't normally compliment vehicle parts in an aesthetically pleasing way, but you might agree with me when you see this. So this is the blow-off valve right here, and if you're not aware, ADDW1 of course makes products for numerous vehicles. So this is more or less a universal product. So as you can see, it doesn't have a actual mounting base. That is right here. And of course, this is the actual mounting bracket to make sure that you can install this blow-off valve into the OEM stock location for the Sonata N-Line, which has Hyundai's 2.5 liter turbo engine. So they have you covered there. O-ring that you just kind of saw pop out. And then of course, a plethora of all the necessary things, the plethora of parts that you need to actually get the job done, like the O-rings, the bolts, all that good stuff. And for those of you that want a little bit of more style, not just function, they actually produce these in other colors. So of course I'll link down below for the product. And at the same time, there's also adjustability for the actual loudness of it, I want to say. I will correct myself if I'm wrong. It could just be adjustability for the actual tension. But again, this doesn't look like your traditional blow-off valve. The design is definitely unique, so I'm actually really excited to see how this sounds, because I'm pretty sure you guys have already heard all the normal usual suspects like the Greddy or the HKS valves out there. So let's see what this one ends up performing like once we get it installed. So first things first, as you can see, there's a bunch of things disconnected. This is actually the scoop that normally goes here. It was actually the easiest thing to remove. Connects to here, and then the scoop is actually here. My apologies. Lift up, really nothing to it. This hose right here, which is right here, as you can see, I actually thought this was really hard to do because I've never seen this. You literally just push these tabs out and just pull out. It's one of the simplest things. Alright guys, so as you can see, we are underneath the hood of the car. This is the actual engine, and we're using this new setup with the wide lens so you guys can see everything. But first and foremost, as I mentioned, there's a few things that will make your life so much easier to do this install. Primarily this scoop, and then of course disconnecting this line right underneath it, and uninstalling the air intake box. This portion of course will be a little trickier because you have to unplug these two sensors. Nothing too crazy, they're clip on, so as long as you pry them off carefully, then they'll come straight off. But let me show you the first part. So this part is the easiest because literally you just pull off, and just like that, it comes off insanely easy. Now you have a little bit more space. So then there's this hose, which is of course considered the hot side, the one that comes from the turbo to the intercooler, and then the cold side, which goes of course from the actual intercooler where the blow-off valve is, and then into the intake, so that much chunkier hose. This one I thought would be really hard to remove. As you'll see in the video, I mentioned that you literally just pull these little springs out and you should be able to easily pull it. Just make sure that when you reinstall it, it lines up with this tab, because of course it goes on one way and off another. Okay, so quick update. Of course, as mentioned before, we had to remove things. That's natural. You have to remove hoses and disconnect stuff. It's actually rather straightforward, so not much to complain about or shine light on. But as you can see right now, that is where the OE bypass valve bolts up. Right now, we actually put the plate, and I wish that this camera would actually just kind of, oh, there we go. So as you can see, we put the actual adapter base, and then from there, it's up to you, of course. Like if you have the small hands to actually do it, you can actually snap the blow-off valve with the O-ring into its place, and then of course just kind of maneuver it around to see the best way to mount it. As you can also see down there, there's an extension. ADDW1 includes a filter that goes in line. It's that little green kind of like T-valve. It's not a T-valve, but just a vacuum line. It's got a little filter in there included, and then they include a hose, so that actually gives you a little extra slack to be able to connect to their bypass valve, or I'm sorry, their blow-off valve. So that would definitely help. If you're installing any other kind of blow-off valve, you just got to be a little mindful, because the actual vacuum line that's connected to the actual OE bypass valve is not that long, so you might have to kind of figure out how to get things set up, and hopefully of course those other manufacturers took that into consideration. But in this case, especially because the blow-off valve is quite tall compared to other models, this inclusion of the filter and of course the extra little vacuum line is definitely going to be helpful. So now we just got to figure out which way to orient the blow-off valve port itself, the the actual vent, and go from there. So this is the stock bypass valve. This is the aftermarket ADDW1 blow-off valve. As you can see, there's a pretty big size difference, and this is actually already kind of a pain because of the way it sits. So like if you were looking at it, the intercooler would have it mounted as such, like this. Mounting that and just seeing how much space you have as opposed to this, we're definitely going to see the best way to actually get this to fit in there. Nice thing is, because of the O-ring, you should be able to kind of move this into a position that'll best suit you, and then of course bolt it down. So that's definitely a positive that's going to help us out. Another thing is, this is a full vent to atmosphere blow-off valve. There is no recirculation port or option, so they of course include in the kit a cap for the recirculation hose, so you don't have just a free hose just sitting there with no filtration and just allowing debris to kind of go in through that side. So again, ADDW1, big props for thinking these things out. I'll actually show you under the bay real quick, just to kind of, you guys can get an idea of what it looks like once this is removed, and the hoses that had to be basically moved out of the way to essentially get this out. The part that did give my friend Rob a hard time, which is the recirculation hose that for now has been removed, and we have it like right here. Again, we removed it for now to not bother anything, and I don't really have a light, but the hose is actually right above, oh, there we go, here. And so it was removed. Again, just typical clamps. ADDW1 gives you that little, like I said, the little cap to put there, so that way it's not unfiltered. And it's dark, but as you can see, actually as you can see, it normally mounts right here, right there. So now just to basically get it to install and go from there. All right, so sit rep update. It might make your life easier to remove the air intake box to actually get down to the install. One, because that hose mentioned earlier is a little tight, but it also ends up being underneath the blow-off valve. So as you can see, the blow-off valve is now fully installed, and I'm trying to get this to, there we go. So as you can see, the blow-off valve is fully installed. The vacuum line is actually underneath, and again, it's kind of hard, but I'm gonna try to shine the light. So if you go past the blow-off valve down there, yeah, so unfortunately I don't think I could get it on the camera, but underneath the blow-off valve, basically there's that metal piping that this hose is connected to. You can clearly see that. If you go further down, there's actual two bolts that are holding that metal pipe to the actual intercooler itself. You can actually get to those and remove those, which will essentially remove this whole section right here that I'm shining, and just pull it out, which will make your life so much easier to install the blow-off valve. Again, in order to get space enough to do that and leverage, you need to remove the air box. So, not for the faint of heart. If you have small hands, you can technically do it without doing this extra work, but it will be much longer of a process. Anyways, time to put everything back together. All right, so everything is back, all the hoses and everything reconnected. The only thing we left off right now is a scoop, just to show you that even though you could probably barely see it because I don't have much light, But actually, let me light myself up. But as you can see, it's sitting there, and then once we put the actual scoop, of course, it will be completely hidden. The only thing with this particular kit, because it doesn't give you the option to recirculate, it's 100% full atmospheric vent, is we removed this hose that you see right here. Let me actually pick it up for you guys. So we completely removed this hose, which is the actual recirculation hose. The larger side goes towards the actual blow-off valve, and then, bypass valve, and then the shorter side goes actually to the engine. So it's actually normally tucked down here. I'm gonna see if I can show you guys where it's at. So if you can see that black nozzle right there, that's where it normally goes connected to, and then of course it just goes straight down and would connect to the bypass valve. But again, this one doesn't have the option to go either or. This is full atmospheric vent. And the nice thing is that, as you can see, the top part of the blow valve, so that's the adjustment. So if you need to soften it or tighten it, you can actually still reach it relatively easy by just removing the scoop. So we're gonna basically put this back together, cap off where the bypass hose went, and essentially turn it on, make sure that no codes get thrown, and see what this sounds like on a cold start. All right, so that cold start really didn't make any sound, which, whatever, it is what it is. But now that it's warmed up, let's rev it. Wow, it sounds really crisp and clean. I like it. Alright guys, so first things first, and just forgive for the scuff quality, we're in sport mode. The one thing that I want to kind of point out is this car, you can't really hear it on the inside because, again, the interior does a great job of muffling things. Also, forgive me if the audio sounds scuffy. We're using the DJI so you guys can see my point of view, but I'm going to show you real quick. So if you could see, we're going to rev. We're in the parking lot right now. And this car doesn't really generate boost until about like 3,000 RPM or beyond that. So just look at the boost gauge right down here, and you'll see, right, you can't even hear it. And that's at 3,000. So there was a little bit of boost in a blow-off valve. You couldn't really hear it when driving. You couldn't really hear it in the moment. So I'm gonna roll the windows down so you guys can kind of see what I mean. I'm gonna just kind of very carefully do a few passes on this closed off road, just so you guys can see. This blow-off valve is very crisp and clean. Forgive me if there's wind noise, because of course I have to go at speed, and with the windows up, like I said, this cabin muffles sound very well, so you're not going to hear it without the windows down. Now hopefully the GoPro footage that I'm going to post after this gives you a clear idea and indication of how good and crisp it sounds, but well, we'll show you. So let's actually do a very small pull here. If you can't hear it that well, I greatly apologize, because like I said, there's air, and the cabin of the Sonata N-Line is just amazing at muffling sound. So we'll do one last pass right here. Hopefully you can hear it. We're in second gear, as you can see, and we're gonna do it. Alright guys, so a few afterthoughts and just kind of an overall summary after the install. I've had this blow-off valve installed in the car for about 3 weeks now, so very close to a month. And as some of you know, I daily drive the Sonata N-Line essentially every single day back and to from work. My commute is roughly about like 50 miles a day, and this particular blow-off valve has just worked phenomenally well. For those of you that know, or any of you that kind of peruse just performance reviews and whatnot, one of the biggest things about a blow-off valve, like the biggest complaint, is how fast it can actuate. specifically when you're targeting larger numbers and horsepower builds, specifically the N-Line being kind of the monstrosity that it is stock. One, it's a larger engine, it's a 2.5 turbo, so that's quite beefy. Two, as opposed to the stock turbos of some of the 1.6 turbo engines, the turbo on this one is of course much larger. And there's so many people that are already jumping on piggyback systems like the JB4 and Lap 3, to name a few, to push out even more power out of this machine. So the biggest priority in a blow-off valve is to make sure that, as opposed to like a stock bypass valve, that it is not releasing or opening early, unfortunately letting boost, so to speak, leak out, and of course affecting your overall top numbers, because again, the valve is just actuating a little too soon. Or even worse, of course, is that you have larger boost numbers and it's not actuating fast enough, which of course causes backspin in the turbine and so on and so forth. And I'm happy to report that this particular blow-off valve works phenomenally well. The actuation is just quick and it matches up perfectly with the dual clutch transmission in the N-Line. So much so that one of my only complaints, and this has nothing to do with the product or the blow-off valve, is that you don't unfortunately get to enjoy the blow-off valve as often as you like, for two reasons. If you daily drive and you're not in sport mode, like you saw, boost doesn't actuate or build up until about 4,000 RPM-ish. Of course, that's what we call turbo lag, and that's fine. The engine itself, for the sake of fuel mileage, the tune I should say, will shift very early, and the dual clutch does a phenomenal job of that. But to that same point, even when you're on sport mode, for example, and you're getting on it, if you're not shifting gears yourself, the transmission will shift very quickly. And of course, you'll hear it, but it'll be just for that like really brief tiny second, a quick psh, and then just back on power, which again is great for performance. And to ADD1's credit, the actuation is just quick, crisp, and clean, which again, tribute to the sound. But if you're that person that just wants to constantly hear it, you're definitely gonna have to drive a little more aggressively. I definitely suggest driving manually by shifting your own gears. And as you saw in the footage that I had to take, clearly I had to kind of get on it, release the throttle myself so you could actually hear it, and then basically just kind of do runs that way. So if you're gonna be doing any kind of like spirited driving or canyon driving, this valve is just awesome. You're just gonna love the actuation. The sound is just phenomenal. It's that clean, crisp. It's just definitely something unique, which I personally like, because I feel like some other blow-off valves are a little played out with the way that they sound and whatnot. And like I said, the other thing is big plus to solid points and the way that it mounts. The way that it mounts is actually so flexible as far as the installation process that it was actually quite easy. But not just that, you have space, because one of the biggest complaints about some of the other aftermarket blow-off valves, unfortunately, it leaves for a very tight install space to the point where it's a little uncomfortable. And of course, at sometimes it's just so tight that it's a little bothersome that it can get in the way of other components. And I'm happy to report that that's not a problem at all with this particular blow-off valve. I think the ADDW1 knocked it out of the park. They clearly did their research in making a product that was just user-friendly, and most of all, probably what the community wanted. Again, it's not about who's first, but in my opinion, who does it best. And realistically, this is probably one of the best options out there. Not to just say, probably one of the very few options out there. And with my experience with ADDW1, now also probably one of the more reputable ones, especially because that name to me now means quality. And like I mentioned, you guys saw the images. The part is just so nice looking. It just looks like an expensive item, and it's actually not that expensive, which is the greatest part about it. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought, what you believe, what you think of the build quality, what you think of the design, and of course, most of all, the most important part, what you think of the performance and how this thing sounds. Like I said, from my point of view, it's phenomenal. I personally have no complaints. I am insanely happy. When they made this thing, they really thought about their community, the end user, which is you and I, of course, and basically the gripes of install and just, of course, keeping the valve reasonable for the DIY guy or girl out there. So with that being said, guys, again, please give me the feedback in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. Is this something that you're gonna pick up? I mean, hey, it's got my seal of approval. But as always, we're back. Thank you guys for all the love and support. soon with more reviews, more installs. I'm super excited that we finally, got my little camera issue fixed. But guys, please stay safe, keep doing you, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Alright, so this might pick up wind noise because of this obvious huge fan, but this is really cool. It's a swamp cooler. It's in the shop. Literally just uses water, but it works almost as well as AC. And at least from my point of view, it's not that loud. Maybe sitting in front of it, you guys are probably picking up wind noise, but it's not even like on a really high speed or anything. It's actually, you can see at the top, it's on low, but I'm telling you, like, you feel the most amazing breeze from this. It's really cool. If you have a shop, probably invest in one of these. I wish I had one of these. It's so awesome.